I wanted to share 3 options for texture that you have for these Kurinuki Teabowls or Unomis. 2 of them will be using a wire and another one will be using a paddle, or in my case, a wooden spoon. So I'll start with this wire cutter option. So this is really where you you're the artist, you get to play. I like to be really freehand with this option. I like to see what kind of slices I can get. I am looking to use some of clay's natural texture, so I am using its stone-like appearance. I'm trying to zigzag. I sort of tear through the clay in this instant. I'm trying to give it a lot of planes and a lot of areas of highs and lows and peaks and valleys. I'm also facing it towards you, so it's a little bit harder for me to see what I'm doing, but I think based on the camera angles, I am doing okay. So the wonderful thing about working with a lump of clay that's solid is you can't cut through anything. You know, it's hard to make a mistake because it's literally just a solid piece. If you cut away too much, oh well, that's part of the design. If you don't cut enough away and you want to come back in, you're welcome to do that as well. But so that is kind of the beautiful thing, and you know, very liberating project. So here I'm just gonna make sure that I get this texture all over the place. I try to do it as evenly as I can to maintain this sort of shape. I'm honestly overall pretty happy with the shape of this, so I'm gonna leave it alone and I will continue to show you another option. So another option that you have is a little bit more simple, a little bit more geometric, a little less free. This is going to be a faceted Teabowl. So here I'm just cutting lines away to create a facet, a very angular shape for a Teabowl. Again, this is where, you know, your artistic ability or your design idea will determine what you're doing. I'm creating really big facets, very wide facets. You might find yourself wanting to do thinner facets. So for this, I'm interested in these big fat facets, nice and wide, okay? Again, I'm not looking for perfection here. This is a handmade object. You could come back if there's like a facet that's driving you crazy. You could straighten it out, or you could deliberately make your facets uneven. You know, if that's kind of the look you're going for, you could certainly do that. You can straighten your facets out. Again, this is entirely up to you. Now, another option that you have is using your paddle. I happen to love this. I think you get a very lovely texture with the paddle doing this technique. So I just take a spoon, I have a curved side on one side and a flat side on the other, and I just come in and I sort of whack this mound of clay, and sometimes I hit it with the flat side to create more of a multifaceted, multi-dimensional, sort of interesting, almost stone-like or rock-like formation. Kind of, you know, more angular, a little bit more interesting maybe. So one of the wonderful things with working with a three-dimensional object, obviously, is that they have all this dimension and shadows and plains and valleys and peaks. So you can really capitalize on this sort of, you can see already how much more interesting this clay is becoming, how many times I go in and flatten it out, and what I end up doing with this. Now, we're making tea bowls, so I'm gonna go ahead and put a foot on this piece, but if you wanted to, you know, this is creating a very lovely bottom. You can see how interesting this is. So if you wanted to keep this, for example, this might make a wonderful whiskey glass or a tumbler. If you wanted to maintain, I think this sort of choppy foot is quite lovely. Maybe for this one, I will leave this foot as is. Look at all this wonderful stuff that's happening so fast, so easy, and without much effort at all. You suddenly created this wonderful textural object. Okay, so here we have it. These are our 3 textures. Now you certainly don't have to stick to these textures. You could try your own. I just thought I would give you some to play around with. So now that I have my texture that I want, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place this piece with the bottom side up. So whatever side I decide is going to be the bottom, that's the side that's now facing up. And I'm going to trim a foot. I went ahead and I centered this on the banding wheel as best as I could. Obviously it's not perfectly round, but it's fairly in the middle. Maybe a little bit more over on this side. Now you're going to decide what your trimming tools are going to be. You're going to start out with the larger tool first, and then you're going to go in with the finer tools as the piece dries to get the bulk of the clay out. Before you begin though, what I would recommend doing, especially if you're a beginner, is to take a needle tool and to mark where your foot is going to be first, so you don't carve away too much accidentally. Okay, so now that I'm looking at this, I can see that this piece is a little off center. So I'm gonna try to mark it again now that I've adjusted it. Okay, so this ring right here, this is kind of gonna be a guide for where my foot ring is going to go. Traditionally, these Unomis have a very tall foot. So that means that I'm gonna carve a lot away. I'm gonna carve down significantly to create this foot. I'm holding this in place so it doesn't go far or doesn't accidentally slip. And I'm holding my tool in one general area. Okay, so now I sort of have a general idea. I went a little too far on this side, as you can see, but you know what? I kind of like that. So before I continue going, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna continue sort of the texturizing around this tea bowl. to sort of continue with my pattern. I want that to still be there as I'm working on it. And now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna carve out, now that I have my outside, I'm gonna go ahead and just start carving the inside of my foot ring. Now you know how far I went on the outside. I'm gonna try to go about the same distance on the inside. So this clay is pretty much straight out of the bag. I didn't really let it dry at all. That's why it is so moist and so wet, and that's why I'm able to carve large chunks of clay out. And then once I do that, okay, so now my foot is really, really deep. Okay, and I can go ahead and refine this, but I'm going to wait until this clay gets a little bit more stiff, a little less plastic, and then I'm gonna clean out my foot. For right now, I am pretty happy with the way this looks. I will clean it up a little bit later. Okay, time to flip the cup. So now I went ahead and I flipped this upside down. So now the foot that I trimmed is on the bottom and the top is on top. I'm going to do the same thing I did with my needle tool, and I'm gonna give myself just a slight guide, just so I don't go overboard and carve through my piece accidentally. So I'm trying to give this kind of an idea of where my initial carving is going to begin. So now that I did that, I can take my bigger tool and I just hold it, and then I go around and I take all of this clay out. So like I said, this clay right here, it's straight out of the bag, it's fresh. You can go ahead and you can carve most of this out in this state. And then as you do this, you can then re-wedge whatever clay you take out of here, and you can reuse it and make it, put it towards a new piece. So this clay can be reused, it doesn't have to go to waste. Because I know at the beginning, these pieces, they look like they require a lot of clay, and they do. But the good news is that you don't have to throw all that clay away. It's completely usable. So as you can see, I carved out most of the interior of this cup, but my edge, okay, is still gnarly. I checked my bottom or my foot to make sure that I didn't carve too far down, and I almost did, but I stopped myself before I went through the bottom. So now at this stage, your cup is about 75% complete. But to refine this edge, to clean this up, at this point it's too early. Also, I will end up carving more clay away. Some of the sides of the walls are still a little thick for my liking. So I will come back and I will wait for this to set up to leather hard before I go ahead and do the final cleanup. So now that this tea bowl is leather hard, and it is a little bit more firm, I can continue my carving and do a lot of the refining. The reason why I tell you to wait until it's leather hard is because the clay is firm or more firm, and it prevents you from cutting too much clay away, causing your tea bowl possibly have holes or thin spots in it. So now that my clay is a little bit more firm and leather hard, I can come in with a lot more control and really, really thin out my opening, or my lip as it is called. So you see the clay is still soft enough to carve, but the piece itself is solid enough to prevent it from being too misshapen. So here's where you'll kind of start, figuring out what type of tools to use. Also, before I continue, what I'm going to do for myself is I'm going to put my hand on the inside, and I'm just going to feel around to try to figure out where the bulk of the weight is. So by feeling this, I can feel that this area or this piece is not too thick. But as I'm reaching over here towards the bottom, this is where the thickness is, like right around here is where I feel it heavy. One of the things that you're looking for is you're looking for this to feel balanced. So when you hold it, the weight distribution of this should be even. Right now, as I'm holding this, I can feel that the weight is mostly on the bottom. Not so much here, because I carved a lot away this way, but I can feel that the bulk of the weight is right around this area. So knowing that and feeling around for that, I can come in and I can then start carving away more specific areas and target those areas specifically with a tool that's, maybe a little bit smaller. So I can have more control, take clay off its smaller areas. And then I can always come in with my bigger, wider tool. And I can carve bigger chunks. And as I mentioned before, if you do end up carving through your wall, just score that area and place a piece of clay right back in and just squeeze it into place, and you should be okay. So one of the things, the same as with your cups, as we've sort of talked about, your lip, you're gonna be drinking from this and you're gonna be putting your lips on it. So it is a good idea to come in and really, really smooth out this area. And also, consider for a minute, what kind of cup do you like? Do you like a thin lip or a thick lip? My mom loves cups with thick lips. I hate it. I like a thin lip. Makes me feel like it's more comfortable. So these are things that you're going to decide for yourself and for the user of your cup. How do you want them to experience this object? So there you have it. I have more or less a finished tea bowl. I'm gonna wait until it's a little bit more firm and really clean up those carving lines in there. Now is a good time to come back and see if you have any of these random clay bits that got stuck to the surface that you don't want to see there. Kind of clean up a little bit, make it look intentional. So I don't have any of these random things like this stuck to my cup. I don't want that there. And there you have it. So sign it on the bottom. And you have a beautiful, you know me.